Hey everyone, I'm here to help you relax and drift off tonight. If you enjoy using these videos to fall asleep, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more calming content. Share where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'd love to know. Now settle into a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's start unwinding together. It began with a curious advertisement in the local paper. Antique four-poster bed for sale. One of a kind. Beautiful hand-carved mahogany. Price negotiable. Eliza Carrington, an antique enthusiast, couldn't resist. The bed looked exquisite in the grainy black and white photo. Intricately carved posts with swirling vines and roses. An imposing headboard that seemed almost alive with detail. And an aged, polished finish that gleamed even in the photograph. She had just moved into a small, secluded Victorian house in the countryside, and the bed seemed perfect for the master bedroom. Without hesitation, she made arrangements to purchase it, driving 2 hours to an old estate where the elderly seller lived. The seller, an old man named Mr. Fenwick, seemed oddly reluctant to part with the bed. His eyes darted nervously as he spoke. "It's a fine piece, but, well, it's seen its share of oddness," he said cryptically, helping her load it onto her truck. "What kind of oddness?" Eliza asked with a smile, trying to put him at ease. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just dreams. Strange dreams. You'll see." Eliza laughed it off, assuming the old man was just superstitious. Dreams were dreams, after all. She thanked him, handed over the cash, and drove off with her prize. After hours of struggling to assemble the heavy bed frame in her master bedroom, Eliza finally sank onto the mattress, exhausted but satisfied. The bed was even more magnificent in person, the carvings so detailed they almost seemed to move in the flickering candlelight. She fell asleep almost immediately. Her dream that night was vivid. She was in a grand ballroom filled with swirling music and dancing couples in elegant attire. The women wore gowns of silk and lace, the men in formal tailcoats. Eliza herself was dressed in a beautiful emerald green dress, and she was twirling in the arms of a handsome stranger. The scene was intoxicating, almost too real. She could feel the weight of the fabric, the heat of the man's hand on her waist, and the cool marble floor beneath her feet. When she awoke the next morning, her heart was still racing, and the scent of roses from the ballroom lingered faintly in the air. Over the next week, the dreams continued, and they weren't always so pleasant. One night, Eliza dreamed of a battlefield. She was dressed as a nurse, tending to wounded soldiers under a gray, smoke-filled sky. The moans of pain, the sharp metallic smell of blood, and the sheer weight of despair were overwhelming. Another night, she was a child hiding in a cramped attic as soldiers stormed a house below. Her heart pounded with terror as she held her breath, praying not to be found. The dreams were more than dreams. They felt like memories, but they weren't hers. Troubled by the intensity of her dreams, Eliza decided to research the bed. She returned to Mr. Fenwick, who greeted her with a knowing look. "You've had the dreams," he said. It wasn't a question. Eliza nodded. "They're so vivid. It's like I'm someone else." Mr. Fenwick sighed. "That bed's been in my family for generations. It came from an estate overseas, somewhere in Eastern Europe. Every person who's slept in it says the same thing. The bed dreams for you. It pulls memories, not yours, but someone else's. Maybe from its past owners. Maybe from the wood it was carved from. I don't know." "Why didn't you tell me?" Eliza demanded. "Would you have believed me?" Eliza had no answer to that. As the weeks went on, the dreams became darker. One night, Eliza found herself standing on a cliff's edge, a storm raging around her. Below, a raging sea crashed against jagged rocks. She wasn't alone. There was a man behind her, shouting in a language she didn't understand. Before she could react, he pushed her, and she fell, screaming, into the icy abyss. Another night, she was bound to a chair in a dark room. Shadows loomed around her, voices whispering accusations. A single candle flickered, illuminating the cold gleam of a blade. She woke from these nightmares drenched in sweat, her heart racing. But what truly unnerved her was that each morning she found physical evidence of the dreams. Dampness on her skin as though she'd been in the sea. Bruises on her wrist where the ropes had been. The bed was no longer a source of comfort. It was a portal to something terrifying. Eliza's waking hours became consumed by her dreams. She stopped going to work, stopped answering calls from friends. She spent hours in the library, researching the history of the bed, the estate it came from, and the region where it was made. She learned that the wood used for the bed had been taken from a forest rumored to be cursed. The villagers believed the trees held the spirits of those who had died violently in the area. Victims of war, betrayal, and murder. The bed wasn't dreaming for her, it was dreaming through her. Determined to free herself, Eliza decided to destroy the bed. She dragged it out into her backyard, doused it in gasoline, and lit a match. But the fire wouldn't take. The wood refused to burn, no matter how much fuel she poured on it. Desperate, she took an axe and swung it at the headboard. The instant the blade struck, Eliza collapsed. She found herself in the ballroom again, but it was different this time. The air was heavy, the music discordant. The dancers turned to face her, their eyes hollow and accusing. "Why did you try to destroy us?" they whispered in unison. Eliza backed away, but the room melted into the battlefield. The wounded soldiers turned their heads to her, their eyes filled with blame. "You can't escape us," they said. The dream shifted again, and she was on the cliff's edge, the storm raging. This time, no one pushed her. She jumped. When the neighbors called the police after hearing screams from Eliza's house, they found her lying unconscious beside the bed in her backyard. She never woke up. The bed was sold at auction shortly afterward, passed on to another unwitting soul. And so the bed dreams on, carrying the memories of countless lives and claiming more with each passing year. On the edge of a jagged cliff overlooking the restless sea stood Blackstone Lighthouse. For over a century it had stood as a stalwart guardian of the coastline, its beams slicing through fog and darkness to guide ships safely away from the treacherous rocks below. Legend had it that Blackstone wasn't just a lighthouse. It was something far more mysterious. Sailors whispered of its light revealing dangers no mortal eye could see, but only those who had lived to tell the tale truly believed the stories. When Hannah McCall, a marine historian, received a grant to study the history of maritime disasters along the Blackstone coast, she was thrilled. The lighthouse itself, abandoned since the 1980s, would be her home for the next 6 months. The stormy, secluded cliffs were daunting, but Hannah was more intrigued than afraid. Little did she know, Blackstone had a history it was eager to reveal, one that had been waiting for her return. The first few nights were uneventful. Hannah spent her days cataloging old ship logs, combing through the wreckage scattered along the rocky shore, and poring over dusty records in the lighthouse's library. On her 4th night, a storm rolled in. Fierce winds howled around the tower, and waves crashed violently against the cliffs. Hannah watched from the lantern room, mesmerized by the fury of the storm. As she turned to leave, she noticed something unusual. The beam of light, which hadn't been operational in decades, flickered to life. The machinery groaned as the massive lens rotated, sending its light out over the sea. Confused and a little unnerved, Hannah grabbed a flashlight and descended the spiral staircase to check the power systems. To her astonishment, everything was still disconnected. The generator was silent, the wires frayed and useless, yet the light continued to shine. Hannah climbed back to the top and looked through the observation window. What she saw sent chills down her spine. In the beam's path, the sea appeared unnaturally calm, but beyond it, just outside the light's reach, Something massive churned the water. Shadows moved beneath the surface, twisting and writhing like a serpent. Before she could process what she was seeing, the storm ended abruptly and the light went out. The next morning, Hannah scoured the lighthouse for clues. In a drawer beneath the keeper's desk, she found an old leather-bound journal belonging to Thomas Grayson, the last keeper of Blackstone. The entries painted a chilling picture. April 12th, 1957. The light shines on more than the rocks. Last night I saw something. A great shadow, larger than any ship. It moved just beyond the beam, waiting. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel the light is protecting us from whatever it is. June 3rd, 1957. I've stopped alerting the Coast Guard. They think I'm mad, but I can't ignore the warnings. The light activates on its own now, always before a storm, always when the waters grow restless. The ships that heed its path survive. The ones that don't, they vanish. August 15th, 1958. I can't stay here any longer. The shadows grow bolder, closer. Last night I thought I heard voices, low and guttural, coming from the water. They called my name. The entries ended abruptly. Over the next few weeks, Hannah experienced more strange occurrences. The light would activate seemingly at random, always during bad weather. Each time she would see the same phenomenon, shadows twisting and turning in the water beyond the light's reach. One night, while documenting the strange events, she noticed a freighter on the horizon. It was heading straight toward the cliffs, seemingly unaware of the danger. The light flickered to life, its beam illuminating the sea. The ship's horn blared in alarm, and its course shifted just in time to avoid the rocks. But Hannah saw more than the ship that night. In the darkness beyond the beam, a massive silhouette surfaced. It looked like a creature from a nightmare, serpentine with long, spiny fins and glowing red eyes. It reared up, then plunged back into the depths, vanishing as the light swept over it. Hannah was trembling when she realized the truth. The light didn't just warn ships of the rocks. It kept whatever lurked beneath the waves at bay. Determined to uncover more, Hannah revisited the journal and discovered a hidden compartment at the back. Inside was a faded letter from Grayson addressed to the next keeper. The letter confirmed her fears. The creatures are ancient, older than the sea itself. They are drawn to places where the boundary between worlds is thin, and Blackstone is one such place. The light was built not just as a beacon for ships, but as a barrier to keep them from coming ashore. If you're reading this, you've seen them too. You must decide, stay and keep the light burning, or leave and doom the coast to their wrath. Hannah had no intention of staying. She packed her belongings and prepared to leave the next morning. But that night, a storm unlike any she had ever seen descended on Blackstone. The wind screamed and the waves rose high enough to crash against the tower itself. The light activated, its beams slicing through the chaos. This time, the shadows didn't stay at the edge. They surged forward, their monstrous forms breaking the surface, claws and tentacles reaching for the shore. Hannah knew what she had to do. She ran to the lantern room and manually cranked the mechanism, forcing the light to rotate faster. The creatures recoiled, but they didn't retreat. The machinery groaned under the strain, and sparks flew from the rusted gears. With one final heave, the light burst into a blinding brilliance, illuminating the entire coastline. The creatures let out an unearthly wail and sank beneath the waves. The storm ended as suddenly as it began. Hannah never left Blackstone Lighthouse. She became its keeper, maintaining the light and documenting each encounter. Over time, she learned how to repair the ancient machinery and even improved it to ensure the light never failed. Sailors began to tell new stories about Blackstone, of a guardian who protected them from unseen horrors. Some claimed to see a lone figure in the lantern room, silhouetted against the beam. Hannah's work continued until her death many years later. By then, Blackstone had become a legend, its light a symbol of hope and mystery. But even after her passing, the light never stopped shining, and neither did the shadows. Rachel Price had always loved the quiet efficiency of hospitals. Fresh out of nursing school, she was thrilled when she landed a job at St. Benedict's Hospital, a sprawling, aging facility nestled in the heart of the city. Its reputation as one of the best hospitals in the region made the opportunity seem like a dream. Her first day was a whirlwind of meeting staff, memorizing routines, and navigating the labyrinthine hallways. The hospital was a blend of old and new, with its gleaming modern wings starkly contrasting its original structure, built over a century ago. "Stick to the east and west wings," her supervisor, Nurse Green, instructed. "The south wing has been closed for years. There's nothing there anymore." Rachel nodded, curious but too overwhelmed to ask questions. Yet something about the south wing tugged at the back of her mind. 2 weeks into her job, Rachel began noticing something strange. A patient, an elderly man named Mr. Holloway, frequently mumbled about the other side and begged not to be taken there. "Don't let them take me to the south wing," he whispered one night, clutching Rachel's hand with surprising strength. His sunken eyes were filled with terror. "It's okay, Mr. Holloway," she said gently. "No one's taking you anywhere." But he shook his head. "You don't understand. They never leave." Rachel couldn't shake Mr. Holloway's words. During her breaks, she asked a few of her colleagues about the South Wing. "Oh, that place," said Sarah, a veteran nurse. "It's just an old, unused part of the hospital. They closed it down decades ago. Budget cuts or something like that. Creepy, though. Feels like it's frozen in time." "I've heard it's haunted," another nurse added. "Patients who went there never came back. Just rumors, though." Rachel dismissed the superstitions, but couldn't deny her curiosity. Late one night, Rachel was walking through the East Wing when she noticed a figure in a hospital gown shuffling down the hallway. The patient's movements were sluggish, almost mechanical. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, hurrying to catch up. The figure turned a corner, and by the time Rachel followed, the hallway was empty. Confused, she checked the nearby rooms, but they were all empty. Then she saw it, a door at the end of the corridor, its paint peeling and the words, "South Wing, restricted access," barely visible under layers of grime. Rachel's heart pounded. The door creaked open slightly as if inviting her in. Unable to resist, Rachel stepped inside. The air was colder, heavier. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the cracked tile floors. The wing was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of old machinery. Dust-covered beds lined the hallways, and faded patient charts lay scattered on the floor. As Rachel moved deeper into the wing, she heard whispers, soft, indistinct voices. She froze, her pulse racing. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. The whispers stopped. Then out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement. A patient, gaunt, pale, and wearing an outdated hospital gown, sat hunched on a bed, staring at her with hollow eyes. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked, stepping closer. The patient didn't respond. Instead, he raised a trembling hand and pointed to a door at the end of the hallway. The door led to a records room cluttered with dusty files and broken cabinets. Rachel sifted through the paperwork, her hands trembling as she read the names. Every file was for a patient admitted to the South Wing. None of them had discharge dates. Suddenly, a name caught her eye. William Holloway, Mr. Holloway. The file stated he had been admitted to the South Wing in 1973, but that didn't make sense. Mr. Holloway was her patient in the East Wing, alive and well. The lights flickered, and Rachel felt a presence behind her. She turned to see the same gaunt patient from before, now standing in the doorway. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. Rachel fled the South Wing, her mind racing. Over the next few days, she researched its history and discovered chilling details. In the 1970s, the South Wing had been a specialized ward for terminally ill patients. It was said to provide comfort care, but rumors of neglect and malpractice began to surface. Patients reported hearing screams at night and seeing staff members disappear without explanation. Eventually, the ward was shut down after an investigation uncovered horrific conditions. Patients had been left to die, forgotten by the world. But some claimed the patients never truly left. One night, Rachel found herself drawn back to the South Wing. She needed answers. As she stepped inside, the air seemed to thrum with energy. The whispers grew louder, and shadowy figures emerged, their eyes filled with sorrow. "Why are you here?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. A woman stepped forward, her translucent form glowing faintly. "We can't leave," she said. "This place holds us. It's our prison." Rachel realized the truth. The South Wing was cursed, a purgatory for those who had suffered and died within its walls. Determined to help, Rachel began spending her nights in the South Wing, listening to the stories of the spirits and recording their names. She reached out to their families, bringing closure to those who had long wondered about their loved ones' fates. As she did, the wing began to change. The air grew lighter, the shadows faded, and one by one the spirits disappeared. But the process took its toll. Rachel grew pale and weary, her energy drained by the nightly visits. One morning, a new nurse arrived at St. Benedict's. Her supervisor gave her the usual orientation, including the warning about the South Wing. "Why is it closed?" she asked. "No one really knows," the supervisor said, "but some say it's not as empty as it seems." As the nurse walked past the hallway leading to the South Wing, she thought she saw a figure in scrubs standing by the door, smiling faintly before vanishing into the shadows. Rachel had never left. She had become part of the South Wing's history, its new keeper, ensuring the forgotten patients would never be alone again. Lila loved exploring antique shops. She found a certain charm in objects with history, imagining the stories they carried through the years. One rainy afternoon, while wandering through an unfamiliar part of town, she stumbled upon an old shop named Ethereal Curiosities. The shop was dimly lit, its shelves crammed with peculiar trinkets, brass candlesticks, faded paintings, and jewelry that glittered faintly under a dusty chandelier. On a small wooden table in the back corner, Lila noticed a pocket mirror with an intricately carved silver frame. The design caught her eye, roses twisting around the edges, their vines forming delicate patterns. The glass was slightly cloudy but reflected her face with an oddly sharp clarity. "How much for this?" Lila asked the shopkeeper, an elderly man with piercing blue eyes. He looked at the mirror and hesitated. "That one's unique," he said. $5, but be careful with it." "Careful?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. The man simply nodded. "It's old, fragile, and strange things have been said about it." Lila laughed nervously. "I'll take it." That evening, Lila placed the mirror on her nightstand. As she brushed her hair, she picked it up and admired its craftsmanship. Tilting it slightly, she noticed something odd. In the reflection, there was a shadowy figure standing just behind her. Her breath caught. She spun around, but the room was empty. Heart pounding, she stared back at the mirror, but the figure was gone. "It's just an old mirror," she told herself, trying to laugh off her unease. Probably a trick of the light. Over the next few days, strange occurrences began to unfold. Every time Lila looked into the mirror, she saw fleeting glimpses of the shadowy figure. Sometimes it was just a silhouette. Other times it appeared closer, its features slightly more defined, a tall figure with sunken eyes and a twisted, eerie smile. She started to avoid the mirror, but no matter where she placed it, it seemed to draw her gaze. One night, unable to sleep, she decided to return to the antique shop and ask the shopkeeper about its history. When she arrived, the shop was closed, its windows boarded up as if it had been abandoned for years. Confused and unnerved, Lila searched online for ethereal curiosities, but found no record of its existence. Lila's paranoia grew. The figure began appearing in other reflective surfaces, windows, puddles, even her phone's camera, but only when she was holding the pocket mirror. One evening, as she was examining the mirror under a bright desk lamp, she noticed an engraving on the back. "He who peers too long shall find a companion in shadows." A chill ran down her spine. Was the mirror cursed? Was the figure real? Determined to get rid of it, Lila threw the mirror into a trash bin far from her apartment. She felt relief for the first time in days, but that night the figure returned. This time it wasn't confined to the mirror. Lila woke up to find her room colder than usual, a faint whisper echoing in her ears. Desperate, Lila confided in her best friend, Emma. Skeptical but concerned, Emma agreed to help her investigate. They went to a local historian who specialized in antique objects. When he saw a photo of the mirror, his face went pale. "That's the mirror of shadows," he said. "It's said to show the spirits of those who've been forgotten or wronged in life. They attach themselves to the mirror's owner, drawn to the reflections." "How do I get rid of it?" Lila asked. The historian frowned. "Destroying it might anger the spirit. You need to find a way to sever its connection peacefully. Perhaps return it to where it came from." With no way to locate the antique shop, Lila tried to communicate with the spirit through the mirror. She lit candles, surrounded herself with salt, and held the mirror tightly. "Who are you?" she asked. The reflection shifted. For the first time, the figure appeared fully formed, a woman with hollow eyes and a mournful expression. The spirit's name was Margaret, a seamstress who had lived in the early 1900s. Betrayed by her fiancé and falsely accused of theft, Margaret had been shunned by her community. Heartbroken and alone, she died clutching the mirror, her only prized possession. Her spirit, consumed by grief and bitterness, became bound to the mirror, seeking solace in the reflections of others. Moved by Margaret's story, Lila promised to help her find peace. She visited Margaret's hometown, scouring old records to uncover the truth of her tragic life. After weeks of research, Lila located Margaret's unmarked grave in a neglected cemetery. She placed the mirror on the grave and said, "Margaret, you were wronged, but your story is remembered now. Rest in peace." The air grew still, and for a moment, Lila felt a warm presence. When she looked at the mirror one last time, Margaret's reflection smiled softly before fading away. Lila buried the mirror beside Margaret's grave, sealing the curse. The whispers ceased, and her life returned to normal. Though she no longer visited antique shops, she often thought of Margaret. Her experience had taught her that some objects carry more than memories. They carry the echoes of lives long past, waiting to be heard. In the small, sleepy town of Briarwood, there was a playground that every child knew but few dared to visit after dusk. Located at the edge of Willow Creek Woods, the old playground was surrounded by stories, most of them eerie. Parents warned their children to stay away, especially during full moons. The centerpiece of the playground was an old wooden swing set. The swings were ancient, with weathered chains and seats that creaked ominously even on calm days. During full moons, the townsfolk swore the swings moved on their own, as if an invisible child was playing. For 12-year-old Ellie and her best friend Jonah, ghost stories were nothing more than entertainment. They'd spent countless nights in Ellie's basement, daring each other to watch horror movies and swapping urban legends. The tale of the whispering swings, however, intrigued them the most. "Do you think it's true?" Ellie asked one afternoon, staring at the playground through the trees from her bedroom window. "No way," Jonah said confidently. "It's just the wind or some old chains rusting. Let's check it out on the next full moon." Ellie hesitated. The stories of the playground weren't just about moving swings. There were whispers of children hearing faint laughter or seeing shadowy figures darting through the woods. but her curiosity outweighed her fear. On the night of the full moon, Ellie and Jonah snuck out of their homes with flashlights. The playground looked different under the silver glow of the moon, the shadows of the trees stretching like fingers across the ground. "See? Nothing creepy," Jonah said, though his voice wavered slightly. Ellie approached the swing set. The two swings swayed gently, though the air was still. She reached out and touched one of the chains. It was cold, almost unnaturally so. "It's probably just a draft," Jonah muttered. Suddenly, the swing beside her moved, its motion slow and deliberate, as if someone had just climbed on. Both kids froze, their flashlights trembling. A faint whisper drifted through the air, so soft it was almost indistinguishable from the rustling leaves. "Did you hear that?" Ellie whispered. Jonah nodded. Let's just go." But as they turned to leave, the whisper grew louder. It wasn't just random sounds, it was a voice. "Push me," it said, faint and childlike. Ellie spun around, her heart hammering. The swing closest to her was now moving faster, as if someone were pumping their legs to gain height. "Who's there?" she called, her voice cracking. The whisper came again. "Push me." Jonah grabbed Ellie's arm. "We need to get out of here." But Ellie was transfixed. She couldn't shake the feeling that the voice was coming from someone who needed help. Against her better judgment, she stepped closer to the swing set. When she reached out to touch the moving swing, the world around her shifted. The cold air disappeared, replaced by the sound of children laughing. The playground was no longer empty. It was alive with children running, playing tag and swinging. Ellie turned to Jonah, but he wasn't there. Ellie felt as if she were in a dream. The children didn't seem to notice her. She watched as a small boy, no older than 6, ran to the swings. His face was familiar, though she couldn't place where she'd seen it before. "Push me," he called, his voice exactly like the whisper she had heard. Ellie hesitated. "Who are you?" she asked. The boy stopped swinging and turned to look at her, his expression somber. "We're the forgotten one," he said. "The ones they left behind." "Left behind where?" Ellie asked, her voice trembling. But before the boy could answer, the laughter faded and the scene dissolved. Back in the real world, Jonah was panicking. Ellie had vanished the moment she touched the swing. Desperate, he ran to her house and explained everything to her parents. Ellie's father, a history enthusiast, was immediately alarmed. He retrieved an old town ledger and began flipping through its brittle pages. "Willow Creek Wood," he muttered, his finger tracing a line of text. "This area was once home to a small orphanage. It burned down over 100 years ago. The children, most of them, were never found." Jonah's stomach dropped. "What do we do?" Her father hesitated. "The swings. They might be tied to the children. If Ellie's still there, she's trapped with them." Ellie was still in the dreamlike world of the past. The boy on the swing had disappeared, and the playground was eerily silent. "Why am I here?" she called out, her voice echoing. A figure stepped out from the shadows. It was the boy again. "You can help us," he said, "but you have to listen." He explained that the swings were the last remnants of their lives. They were bound to them, reliving their final moments every full moon. "We just want someone to remember us," he said, his voice breaking. Jonah and Ellie's father arrived at the playground with an old photo from the town ledger. It showed the orphanage children, including the boy Ellie had seen. Jonah placed the photo on the swing set and whispered, "We remember you." In Ellie's world, the boy smiled. "It's time," he said. "Thank you." The children gathered around the swings, their forms fading into the moonlight. Ellie blinked and found herself back in the present, Jonah shaking her shoulder. The swings never moved on their own again. The townsfolk noticed, and the eerie stories faded. Ellie often visited the playground, leaving flowers by the swing set as a tribute to the forgotten children who had finally found peace. It was a gray, dreary day when Emma stumbled upon the little antique shop on Willow Street. The sign above the door creaked in the wind, reading, "Timeless Treasures." Emma had never noticed the shop before, despite living in the town for years. Something about it drew her in, though she couldn't explain why. Inside, the shop smelled of aged wood and faintly of lavender. The place was packed with trinkets, dusty books, faded photographs, and ornate furniture. Emma wandered aimlessly until her eyes caught a peculiar item at the back of the shop. A tall, elegant grandfather clock. The clock was unlike any she had ever seen. Its face was cracked, and the hands were frozen at 11:58. Beneath the clock face, there was a small, ornate dial with a countdown. 7 days, 14 hours, 22 minutes, 45 seconds. "Isn't she magnificent?" came a raspy voice. Emma turned to see the shopkeeper, an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose. "How much is it?" she asked, intrigued. The shopkeeper hesitated. "It's not for everyone," he said cryptically. "This clock has a history, but if you truly want it, it's yours." Against her better judgment, Emma bought the clock and had it delivered to her home. The clock fit perfectly in the corner of Emma's living room, its dark wood gleaming even in the dim light. She noticed the countdown immediately. 7 days, 12 hours, 10 minutes, 30 seconds. She couldn't figure out what it was counting down to. Was it broken? She tried winding it, but the hands remained stuck at 11:58. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. The air around the clock seemed colder, and Emma often felt as though she were being watched. At night, she swore she heard faint ticking, though the clock itself was silent. By the fourth day, the countdown read 3 days, 4 hours, 22 minutes. Emma began to have vivid nightmares, visions of shadowy figures, whispering voices in a dark, endless void. Desperate for answers, Emma decided to learn more about the clock. She returned to the antique shop, but to her shock, Timeless Treasures was gone. In its place was an empty storefront with boarded-up windows. Emma's next stop was the library. She searched old town records and newspaper archives, hoping to find something about the clock's origins. After hours of digging, she found an article from 1887, "Mysterious Clock Found at Site of Factory Fire." The article described a devastating fire that had killed 13 workers at a clock-making factory. The only item recovered from the ashes was a grandfather clock, which had somehow survived unscathed. The factory's owner, a man named Thomas Huxley, claimed the clock was cursed. "It doesn't tell time," he had said. "It counts down to doom." By the 6th night, Emma was barely sleeping. The clock's countdown now read 12 hours, 34 minutes. She couldn't escape the feeling that something terrible would happen when the clock reached 0. The nightmares intensified. That night, she dreamed of a figure standing by the clock, a man with hollow eyes and charred skin. He reached out to her and whispered, "The time is near." Emma woke up in a cold sweat. The clock's face seemed to glow faintly in the dark room, and she swore she heard faint whispers emanating from it. She decided to destroy the clock. Grabbing a hammer, she swung at the ornate wood, but the hammer bounced off as though the clock were made of steel. Frustrated and terrified, she screamed, "What do you want from me?" The clock gave no answer, but the ticking grew louder. As the countdown ticked down to its final hours, Emma became increasingly desperate. She called her friend Mark, a skeptic with a knack for solving mysteries. "This is ridiculous," Mark said when he saw the clock. "It's just an old piece of junk. The countdown is probably part of some mechanical quirk." But as the countdown hit 2 hours, 15 minutes, Mark's confidence wavered. The room grew colder, and a strange shadow seemed to creep across the walls. "Maybe we should leave," Mark suggested, his voice shaky. "No," Emma said. "I need to see this through." As the final minute approached, Emma and Mark sat silently in the living room, staring at the clock. The air was thick with tension. When the countdown hit 0, The clock chimed, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to shake the entire house. The frozen hands on the clock face began to move, ticking forward to midnight. A blinding light filled the room. Emma and Mark shielded their eyes, and when the light faded, they found themselves in a completely different place. They were standing in the middle of a barren landscape, the sky an ominous shade of gray. The clock stood before them, its countdown reset to 7 days. Around it, shadowy figures began to emerge, their faces pale and expressionless. One of the figures stepped forward. It was the man from Emma's dreams, the factory owner, Thomas Huxley. "This is the clock's realm," he said, his voice echoing. "It was created to hold the souls of those who tamper with time. Each cycle, it chooses someone to join us." Emma's heart sank. "But I didn't do anything." "You brought it into your home," Huxley said, "and now you are part of its story." Emma refused to accept her fate. She begged Huxley for a way out. "There is one way," he said reluctantly. "You must reset the clock before the next cycle ends. But beware, the clock does not like to be denied." Emma and Mark scrambled to the clock, searching for a way to reset it. As they did, the shadowy figures began to close in, their whispers growing louder. Mark found a hidden latch at the back of the clock. With a twist, the countdown reset to 7 days, 14 hours. The figures let out an ear-piercing wail and began to dissolve. Emma and Mark woke up back in her living room. The clock was gone, and the room was eerily silent. Though they were relieved to be free, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the clock wasn't truly gone. Somewhere it was waiting for its next owner, its countdown ready to begin again. The house at the end of Maple Lane had been abandoned for decades. No one in the small town of Eldermere dared approach it. The stories of strange occurrences and whispered legends had ensured that it remained untouched. Yet when Claire Evans inherited the property from a distant relative she'd never met, she saw it as an opportunity to escape her small apartment in the city. "It's just an old house," she told herself as she drove up the overgrown driveway. The two-story Victorian loomed above her, its peeling paint and broken shutters casting eerie shadows in the late afternoon sun. Inside, the house was a time capsule. Dust-covered furniture, antique knickknacks, and faded wallpaper told of a life long abandoned. But it was the bay window in the upstairs study that immediately caught Claire's attention. The glass was pristine, untouched by dust or grime, and it gleamed unnaturally in the dim light. The frame was intricately carved with symbols Claire couldn't identify. She peered through it, expecting to see the unkempt garden below, but instead she saw something entirely different. The world beyond the window was lush and vibrant. Towering trees with silver leaves stretched toward a sky painted in swirling hues of gold and violet. Strange bird-like creatures with iridescent feathers flitted between the branches. It was breathtaking and impossible. Claire spent hours staring through the window, unable to tear herself away. The scene beyond was alive, as if she were watching a real place rather than a painted landscape. Occasionally, she thought she saw figures moving in the distance, humanoid shapes darting between the trees. The next day, she tried opening the window, but it wouldn't budge. She tapped on the glass, and it felt solid, ordinary, yet the world beyond remained vivid and surreal. Determined to understand, Claire began researching. She scoured the house for clues and eventually found a journal tucked inside a drawer in the study. The journal belonged to a man named Elias Morley, her distant relative and the house's previous owner. In his meticulous handwriting, Elias described the window as a gateway. He had spent years studying it, convinced it wasn't just a portal to another world, but a two-way connection. That night, Claire dreamed of the world beyond the window. She walked through its forest, the soft glow of bioluminescent plants lighting her path. In the distance, she saw a figure standing beneath a massive tree. The figure raised a hand as if beckoning her closer, but before she could reach them, she woke up. The next morning, something was different. A faint smear marred the pristine glass of the window, a handprint, though it wasn't hers. Claire's heart raced. Was something trying to communicate with her? She placed her own hand against the glass, aligning it with the print, and felt a strange warmth. The colors in the window swirled and shifted, and for a moment she thought she heard whispers. She grabbed Elias's journal and flipped to the last entry, which read, "They are calling to me. I cannot ignore them any longer. If you are reading this, know that the window is not a blessing. It is a test." Claire couldn't ignore the pull of the window. It dominated her thoughts, consuming her every waking moment. Finally, she decided to see if the gateway could be activated. Following Elias's notes, she placed a series of objects on the windowsill: a silver coin, a feather, and a small vial of water. The moment she arranged them, the glass shimmered like water. She reached out cautiously, and her hand passed through the glass, as though it were a liquid veil. Heart pounding, Claire stepped through. The air on the other side was thick and sweet, carrying the scent of blooming flowers and rich earth. The world was even more vibrant up close. She marveled at the towering trees and glowing rivers, but the beauty was tempered by a sense of unease. In the distance, she saw figures. They were tall and ethereal, with elongated limbs and luminous eyes. They watched her in silence. The beings approached slowly, their movements fluid and deliberate. One stepped forward and spoke in a language Claire couldn't understand, yet somehow the meaning was clear. "You should not be here." Claire tried to explain that the window had drawn her, that she didn't mean to intrude. The being tilted its head. "The window is a bridge, but it is not meant for your kind." "Then why does it exist?" she asked. "To tempt," the being replied. "To test. Many have come before you, drawn by curiosity, but none have returned unchanged." The words sent a chill down Claire's spine. The beings led her to a massive tree with roots that seemed to pulse with life. Beneath it, she saw countless objects: watches, jewelry, books, and more. Each item radiated a faint energy. "These are the remnants of those who came before," one being explained. "They left pieces of themselves behind, willingly or not. The window feeds on what it takes." "What did it take from them?" Claire asked. "Their memories, their hopes." "Their souls," Claire stumbled back, horrified. "I didn't agree to this." "You did the moment you crossed," the being said. "But you have a choice. Leave now, and the window will close to you forever. Stay, and you may find what you seek, but at great cost." Claire was torn. The world beyond the window was mesmerizing, but the being's warnings echoed in her mind. If she stayed, what would she lose? Could she truly risk it? The beings watched her silently as she wrestled with her decision. Finally, she turned back toward the shimmering portal. "I can't stay," she said. The beings nodded solemnly. "Then go and do not return. The window's temptations grow stronger each time it is crossed." Claire stepped through the portal, back into the dusty study. She turned to look at the window, but the vibrant world was gone. All she saw was her reflection in the glass. For days after, Claire felt a strange emptiness. She couldn't remember certain parts of her life, fragments of her childhood, the faces of old friends. It was as if pieces of her had been plucked away. The window remained silent, its surface dull and lifeless. Yet at night, Claire dreamed of the world beyond. She dreamed of the beings and their luminous eyes, of the endless forest and its secrets. And sometimes, just before she woke, she heard whispers, "The window waits."